Hello and welcome to Red Risks Media. This is a live event. Things can go wrong. Please stick with us while we try and sort some of those gremlins out. We live stream to LinkedIn, to YouTube and to Twitter, sometimes to Facebook. So please do join us on these live events. We'd welcome you to subscribe to our newsletter. No spam, I promise. It's only about the live events that are coming up. Now, enough of that. Let's just get on with the show.
Greetings, everybody. Jeanette, Mal, welcome.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
How are you both?
Yeah.
Well, I'm very pleased to say that our guest Tim Houlihan has in the green room. Tim, I can see you there. Nice to see you. We'll bring you on in just one second. Before we do that, let me give you a quick introduction to Tim and his background. Okay, voiceover man, take it away. Tim Houlihan is the co-founder of the award-winning podcast Behavioural Grooves and the founder of the consultancy Behaviour Alchemy. Tim's work with academic researchers at universities in the United States, Europe, Singapore and India, and has also been applying behavioural science in product development, product marketing and sales for nearly 20 years. His podcast with co-host Kurt Nelson has published more than 200 episodes and has listeners in more than 120 countries. Wow. Without further ado, welcome to the show, Tim Houlihan. Tim Houlihan, welcome to the show.
No, there should be no bowing here. No. It's good to see all of you.
Bowing is not allowed. Yeah,
no, bowing is not.
Just in time. Just in time.
We're only bowing because you've turned up.
It's always a bit of a surprise, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you cut it very, very finely. You must have a Swiss watch of some sort going on there. Well, Tim, we were going to hope you would come on a bit earlier because I wanted to introduce you to Jeanette and Mal as well. But hey, we'll just get to know each other as we go along, anyway, as we do. So let me position the show. It was called Better Decision Making with Behavioural Science, and we're really excited to talk about this. Simply because you've done a lot of work in this area and you've got a lot of things you want to share with us. So let me start with my opening salvo question, and then we'll open it up to Jeanette, to Mal, and just have a freestyle sort of chat, really. So, Tim, better decision making with behavioral science. Tell us a little bit about it. Is it even possible, or do we just make decisions on the spot?
Well, we do make decisions on the spot, but that's where behavioral science comes in and can influence and help us actually make better decisions. And we're gonna talk about this at length. But if there's anything that I would really love for people to take away from this, it starts with our unconscious is working constantly. Our unconscious is working constantly to inform and influence the way that we're making decisions. And the unconscious is being influenced by everything that's around us, everything that we have believed, everything that we want to believe. It's really complicated stuff and fascinating stuff and wonderful stuff. But to think that it's just about, oh, I'm just going to make a decision. You present me with some options and I'm going to make a decision. It's not that simple. And we're not that simple creatures. We're pretty complex, which is pretty great.
Oh yeah, I think we are pretty complex, aren't we, Jeanette? What do you think? Is it behavioral science a big part of it?
Oh, I believe, and I don't think it's only in safety, isn't it? Like, we do take decisions every minute, every second, sometimes subconsciously, but sometimes I think with reference to Daniel Kahneman's and Amor Tversky work about the thinking slow and thinking fast. But I would like to talk to him about your statement. You mentioned in some of your works that we took decisions based on the context and environment we build around us. If you could talk about that a little bit, elaborate on those elements, context and environment.
Happy to, Jeanette. I feel like I should have a T-shirt that says "Context Matters" because, like, that's my theme song. Context matters, because let's imagine a scenario, and this was a study developed by Kahneman and Tversky. So imagine your doctor comes to you after you have had some tests done, and your doctor says, "Well, it appears that you have a pretty serious condition, but we have an experimental treatment right now, and 80% of the people who have been through that treatment have lived." And you go, okay. And then the doctor says, well, would you like to do that? Would you like to pursue that experimental treatment? Now, hold on to that thought. And now let's imagine framing it in a slightly different way, where the physician says, we got your test back and you have a pretty serious condition. We've got an experimental treatment that we'd like for you to consider. 20% of the people who have used it died. Instantly we fall back on, wow, that feels very, very different, because the context of the way, or the framing, it just changed from 80% of the people live to 20% of the people die. But of course, it's actually the same data. We're not actually getting two different data points, or we're not getting a different data set. We're just getting opposite sides of the data family. And this is the big problem, that the context in which that's presented now, if I'm being told this is 80% of the people live versus 20% of the people die, deeply influences, a powerful impact on the way that I'm going to choose my path forward. And the thing about this, Jeanette, is that this context exists all the time. We walk into a church, a synagogue, a mosque, instantly we lower our voices. We don't have to be told, make sure you speak quietly. It happens instantly. We have a lot of social conditioning that our context does matter. We get dressed up when we go to certain events. We respond differently when we walk into a sports arena. All of those contexts completely unconsciously influence the way we behave, the way we think about things, the kinds of things that we would consider doing, and the great thing is that they work, and the bad thing is they work. So we have to. So if we're going to influence our behavior in sort of correcting some of the potential troubles, the miscalculations that we make, then we can use behavioral science to come in and influence our better decision making, to pull us either out of context or to create a context where better decisions are made.
Mal's background is
I think they're actually doing that now with COVID, aren't they? Because you talk about decision making, and you talk about the source of the information. Media hype up a lot of things, and they dumb down a lot of other things. So you get sometimes a big imbalance. And a great example, I think, and this is only talking from the point of view here in the UK, the scientists are saying that 1 in 600,000 people may be affected by some form of vaccination. It doesn't have to be a COVID. It's vaccination in general. And yet there are hundreds of thousands of people who are listening to the media saying, oh, there's blood clots, there's deaths, etc., etc. And that's been out of context. And so again, this decision-making element, it has quite a broad impact. And Jenna is right in saying it's not just safety. This is right across the board for everything that we do.
That's a great example, Mal. We are also coming to our decisions and our behaviors with a history of a couple things, right? A history of certain behaviors that we've done, and a history of believing a certain thing about who we are and who we identify with. And so the tribes that we identify with, the groups of people that we identify with, we are deeply influenced by the context of our social environments. And when we get a message from someone who we trust, we're much more likely to just believe it than we are from someone that we don't. I mean, I know that the earth is round. I believe that the earth is round. And why do I know that? My mother told me when I was 6 years old. Now, I didn't go out and measure it. I didn't validate it. But since my mother told me, lots and lots of other scientific data has come forward to validate the fact that the earth is round. So I don't doubt it. But in a world like COVID, where we're just starting to understand it, when you have fractious and very distinctly different perspectives, we can take little bits of science and we can use, and of course the media has got an agenda, right? But all those things influence us in ways that are building on how we've come to this very place in time, and who our social circles are that are influencing the context in which we're hearing it.
Just want to say that Gary Wong is just said context matters. Gary is part of Kinevin framework. You probably know about them. Complexity with Dave Snowden. Gary's an old sparring partner of ours, and he's going to come on a future events. But he says, yeah, context does matter. It's so true. And what Mal says and Jeanette said. Can I ask you a question? I watched a program today, a Netflix program called Coded Bias, and it was about algorithms. And what I wanted to say to you was, is we're getting these algorithms. This was a fascinating program, folks. If you get a chance, watch it. It's free of charge. It's on Netflix. And it talks about how algorithms are built, and it's built by people of a certain, let's just say, faction, okay? That faction is driving the determination and the decision making for everything we do, buying on Amazon, whatever it is, right? So when we talk about better, when we talk about better, when we talk about better decision making with behavioral science, well, the behavioral science of it has been embedded by these small group of people within these huge algorithms that are now helping to drive decision making for the people out there. It's almost like the blind leading the blind. Have you come across that yourself, Tim?
Well, I'm not sure if it's quite as bad as the blind leading the blind, but there's definitely an impact. Let's use the example of the MIT lab is studying how for autonomous automobiles, and so there's this big moral question. Right, it's sometimes referred to as the trolley study, where do we program the car, the autonomous vehicle, in a situation where if it goes straight, it's going to kill let's say a mother and 3 children, but if it turns, it will kill an elderly man. And there's a moral code in that, right? There's a moral aspect of decision making, and so this is something that I think we humans have to think about and talk about. And this kind of gets into moral philosophy. It gets into, are we going to be utilitarianism, going to focus on utilitarianism or some kind of other moral code to help this? And I think I think these are big, complicated problems, but on a more basic level, somebody at Facebook built an algorithm that said, when you see this, we're going to show you this and this and this and this and this. So, it's clever, and it's also intentional. And it was one person, or a committee, or a group, or a whole company. I don't know,
a group of people.
That came to agree that this is the right model, the right formula to use. And so there is a moralism to virtually everything in our world, and especially when it comes to decision making. Jeanette, you're kind of shaking your head on this. Are you familiar with the MIT work, the MIT lab?
Yeah, I was reading about that just because I'm doing this Yale studies right now, just aside of that. And I absolutely agree, because if you read Nudge book, the classic one of Richard Thaler, remember he was telling about that he's afraid and he's scared of the nudge, because if it's in the bad hands, then it's going to be a negative nudge, or phishing, I think they call it. So I think it's a moral code, moral issues. But isn't it like the decisions is something that sometimes we think we take those decisions, but we were nudged or kind of directed towards those decisions, in a very smart way. But from other side, when we talk about safety, what is bad about nudging our employees to take the right decisions, isn't it?
Right. So it does seem sort of intuitive to say, wouldn't it be appropriate to nudge someone to be safe, to avoid catastrophic situations, to avoid danger?
But isn't that the balance of leadership, teaching, and making sure that people do things what we consider to be correct?
It is. I think it's also there's a certain aspect of what the people like Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein
Cass
talk about.
Sunstein.
Yeah, they talk about libertarian paternalism. So there's a paternalism that is influencing us in a way that says we think we know what is in your best interest. But the libertarianism comes in and says, and we want you to be able to decide what you think is best. And so for instance, savings. Shlomo Benartzi and Richard Thaler have done a lot of work on savings plans, and by changing when you join a company, when employees join a company for the first time, they get the opportunity to engage in a company-based savings plan, and in the U.S. for years and years and years, those plans were opt-in. So if I wanted to save, I had to check the box and say, yes, I want to get into the savings plan, and then choose how much I wanted to save. And then what Thaler and Benartzi found is that by changing it to an opt-out, now our savings rates go from about 40% of all the employees to about 80% of all the employees.
Wow.
And so, like, on one level, I think we could agree that that's probably a good thing. Yet there are some arguments that say it's still a moralism that's being, imposed on people, even though they can opt out, even though they can say, I don't want to save. And there are 20% of the people that do that. There's still a sense of moralism that says we believe, the paternalism that says we think that it's in your best interest to save and to save more. So I think that these are good discussions to have. I think the MIT lab with C.A.R.E is important. And Mal, I would just want to say one other thing about leadership. It's leadership that is ultimately going to bear, going to carry the cross. They're going to have to really own the decisions that corporate policies bring to light. Leadership is going to have to say, the leaders of organizations are going to have to agree, this is the sort of the code that we want to have for our company's policies, which they do now. But I think when we're getting into behavioral science, it might challenge them.
I see.
Well, I think we've already raised the point on a few of our previous transmissions that we've had with post-COVID.
Yes.
What's the next step? So we talk about leadership. If we are observing the workforce firsthand, you can, I suppose, make a quicker decision. Whereas now, post-COVID, we are talking about remote working. We're talking about working in lots and lots of different areas. So you don't have the same working environment. And so again, all our decision making now from the behavioral science will inevitably change.
That's a really good point, actually. I mean, in the UK, Tim, just to give you an idea, the PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, nationwide, one of the biggest building societies, they've all decided to make home working a thing of the future. So more and more people are going to be working from home. I mean, where are we going to say that, well, if we're going to make better decisions and we're going to use behavioral science, you're not going to get much of a chance to look at behavioral sciences if people aren't close to each other, are they? You're going to depend on algorithms to tell you what their behaviors are, which has been designed by 7 or 8 people. So well, what are we going to do? I'm going to monitor Jeanette's behavior today by using this algorithm to see what you're doing, right?
Well, it might be that Jeanette's behavior changes because she's not going to the office, and it might be in good ways. I mean, to some degree, there's an argument that working from home is a little bit of a return to pre-industrial revolution. Prior to the 1820s or 1830s, when factories pushed everyone out of the home. Before that, the blacksmith had his forge, in the back of the house, and the seamstress worked out of the front parlor, and it was normal to work in the home. And so this presents an opportunity to push to something that I don't mean to say that it's reactive or reactionary back to the 1820s, but it might pose some new norms on us, right? There might be the creation of new norms, and it's going to challenge the algorithm writers, the designers, right? It's going to challenge the designers of the algorithms, because people might be looking at the world differently.
Jeanette?
Yeah, Tim, I would like to come back to the topic we have today, better decisions.
Yes.
And I was reading about you, so as a part of the pre-show preparations. And the question I have, I'm really curious about what you talk about, intrinsic motivation, social motivation. If you could elaborate more about how you see things, how to overcome biases in decisions, how to take better decisions, your thoughts, your advice.
Well, I can answer that in three words, probably, or not.
Read my book. Read my articles.
Read my books. Read my articles. Right. Gosh, Jeanette, it's well. Let me unpack.
Tim, Jeanette does a research, by the way. So
I got it. I got it.
No, I'm really interested in that, how to take better decisions, because everyone who's watching us today, they come to understand. I think all of us want to take better decisions.
So, maybe the most important thing to do if you're thinking about, I want to make better decisions, is to start with decisions that are going to have meaningful impact in your life. To start with big, and segregate them from sort of day-to-day type decisions, unless you see something that is a day-to-day type decision that's getting in your way, or that you're not happy with the way it's going. And so if we start with bigger decisions, buying an automobile, buying a home, renting an apartment, these sorts of things are pretty significant in our lives because of the financial impact and the impact on our lives. And then I think you want to focus on the process. Let's say that let's take it out of home. Actually, let's think about work and think about, we're going to institute a new policy, and we want to create this new policy. And I think that you have to start with the process that you're using to come up with that policy. Are you actually doing a good job of bringing in the stakeholders that are going to positively influence a balanced view of how that policy might impact the employees? And then do one of the things that I think is one of the most important tools is a pre-mortem. So people have heard about the term post-mortem, where after the fact, ex post, you actually go back and look in the rearview mirror and see what went wrong and what went right. That's a post-mortem. A pre-mortem suggests that the policy designers could sit down and say, okay, let's try to anticipate what could go wrong with this. And
we call it risk assessment team.
Yes, yeah, it is. It is a risk assessment team, and yet I want to expand that, because I want to broaden the conversation to all of the things that can go wrong. It's in the execution of the new policy. It's the communication tools that are going to be created, the communication media that will be created to alert the employees as to what this new policy is. Really, just dive into the minutia, so that the team that is designing starts to ask the questions about what could go wrong. What are the problems that we might encounter? And if we do encounter those things, then let's figure it out. Let's pre-solve those problems. Let's try to anticipate, and we can't anticipate everything, but let's really work at trying to understand what those problems are, anticipate the problems, and develop plans around them, so that when something actually does fail, we've already thought about it. And this is the most important part about the pre-mortem, and especially with these big decisions, is context matters, right? We're in this is what the behavioral sciences call a cool state. When I'm before the experience, like before I go out in the evening to meet friends at a bar that I haven't done in a year and a half, and I'm excited to see them. But before I leave the house, I decide I'm going to have one beer and I'm going to leave at 10 o'clock. And then what happens when I'm there? Then I'm in a hot state, right?
3 beers, 4 beers.
Yes, it's going to be. I'm almost joining the gallon club. I'm
right.
going, and it's midnight, and I was like, no, So the pre-mortem anticipates what my hot state might be, coming, and says, okay, so if I get past my first beer, if I finish my first beer and it's only 9 o'clock, but I said I was going to leave at 10, what am I going to do? And come up with a plan. Come up with an alternative for how I'm going to deal with that.
Yeah.
But Tim, this is nothing new, though, is it? In our industry, this is simply goal setting, and I know you're a great advocate of, if you're setting goals, keep them as few as possible, because then they become achievable. It's when you start having 10, 15, 20 goals, you lose sight of the end line, or rather the first phase of the goals that you're trying to achieve, which will then enable you to further outside of the box and push a little bit further. And these are all, again, I'll use an old terminology, they're all SMART goals, aren't they?
Oh, yes.
Because we got to make them specific. We have to make them measurable, definitely achievable. And if you stick to your one beer, you'll achieve it. But then you say, but is that realistic?
Yeah,
it will certainly be time phased if you manage to get out of the pub by 10 o'clock.
What if the context changes?
Yes. Well, and something that I'm writing on right now that I haven't published yet is the idea of the North Star. And by the way, I am a big believer in goals. I've done a lot of research with Dan Ariely and with George Lowenstein on goals, and I'm a fervent believer in it. I also think that at this time when things are changing so much, goals become it's hard to keep goals fluid. Right. Goals have to be specific, measurable, achievable, they have to, realistic in order to be, they have to be. And yet in a time when things are changing so much, it's very difficult to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time sensitive. So I've been thinking about something called a North Star, which is not something, the North Star has been used by navigators for thousands of years, and no one is navigating to the North Star. Right? We're not trying to get to the North Star, but we are using the North Star as a navigation tool to help us determine where we're at and if we're on the right path. And I feel like in times like this, when things are very fluid, that having a North Star defined in our lives, and that could be values, it could be things that we just believe in, to have a North Star to glance up at and check our navigation against. Are we heading in the right direction? Because things are changing. The contexts are changing. The circumstances are changing. Regulations are changing. COVID is changing everything. Are we still kind of tracking along a path that is consistent with our North Star? That's
which is direction. It's always direction.
North Star is always in the northernmost point of the sky, wherever we are. Yeah.
Tim, you've stoked up some chat here, so let's catch up on some of this chat that's going on. So we left it with Gary saying context matters. Now, Vince Butler is a very good friend of the show, and we always have the same conversation, which is a very important. Hi, Vince. A very important conversation about the number of people that are killed across the world every year. I want to come back to this one because we're going to wrap it up in some way where I'll throw a curveball at you and hopefully it'll cover all of this because I've been watching the chats coming in. Tanya says, pre-mortems are so undervalued. I love this. Darren, a good friend of the show, says, is Tim aware of the PJDM construct, which is the professional judgment and decision-making construct within performance psychology? I guess you are. We'll cover all these, Tim, in just 1 second. Let me just cover some of the chats and clear the backlog. Tanya says context is critical. Absolutely. Vince says we have laws that effectively need a pre-mortem. And Tanya picks up on the comment that Jeanette made about risk assessment. We need to value the consequence more than the probability. If the consequence is disastrous and unlivable, set the probability to 1. Know what you will, when, not if happens. And Gary, they're flying in now, Tim. Hold on a second. It says Vince Butler, I assume you're referring to political laws rather than natural universal laws, etc. Tanya, values are more invariant, especially core values. Okay, risk assessment. Okay, so now let me, North Star as a vector direction.
Oh my God.
Well, that's complexity for you. We'll leave that. So look,
Love that. Right. Love it. Yeah.
I've got a curveball for you. Okay, I'm going to try and wrap this up in a certain way. So in our world of health and safety and risk management, son, as you very well know, when we start talking about decision making, we rely on this risk assessment process. We have different types of people: risk aware, risk appetite, where they have very risk neutral, risk seeking, risk averse, and so on. So when you talk about behaviors, their behaviors, a behavior of a risk averse person is totally different from a risk seeking person. So that's where the leadership comes in. If a leader is very, high flying, I want to take that risk, I want to go for it, you know how the decisions are going to be made there. But decision making for us in our line of work, when we do risk assessments, we are fuddy-duddy in a sense that we go through a process of saying, let's assess this, let's do a task-based risk assessment, let's build the performance indicators which are leading and lagging, we'll do the pre-mortems, post-mortems, and everything else, as you say. But is that what you're familiar with as well when you talk about the sort of decision making that you're talking about with behavioral sciences? Are we sort of wrapping it up in that framework?
Yes, and I would also like to narrow that a little bit, because people in general might be predominantly risk seeking or risk averse. However, we are also, in this complexity, we could be risk seeking in one area of our life and risk averse in another area of our life.
Yes.
And a lot of that is context based. Right. So I have a good friend who is a researcher, and he is extremely risk averse in his career. He is extremely conservative about the way he approaches his job, and yet he loves to go mountain climbing, and he is extremely risk seeking when it comes to high altitude hikes and mountain climbing. And those are two very, very different things. So and it largely depends on how much control he feels he has over the environment. Mm-hmm. So in the world of academia, he actually feels like he has very little control, and so he manages that by being very, very conservative and very risk averse. And yet, when he's out in the wilderness, he feels like I can take on specific things, not everything, but specific things, by a careful assessment of what's going on, and be more risk-seeking in those situations.
But I'd like to throw something back at you. I had a boss. Sorry, Jeanette, I just want to throw this back. I had a boss a long time ago who said to me, "You know what? You need to be a bit more risky, Sonny. Right? You're not going to get anywhere in your life if you don't take these risks. We have to do that project. We have to do this. We have to do that. But boss, I don't want to hurt people. I don't want to kill people. I don't want to lose my job. Outside of my zone where I'm having impact on other people, societal, whatever, I'm going to be not as risk seeking as I'm going to be riding my mountain bike across, some stony ground, or flying off these hills and so on. I've only got myself to blame there when I break a leg or break my neck. You've got to put it in context, and that's why I said context matters. Mm-hmm. It is really important to take that on board.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Sonny. I think when you are in a work environment, you have to be risk averse. Otherwise, as you say, if anything happens, it's your neck that's on the line. Whereas if you're out in the wilderness, as Tim says, you are in control of your own risk, and you should know your own skill set and what you're able to do and what is bordering on extreme. And there are a lot of people out there who are extreme, and yet they work in offices.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to get back to this, Sonny, I think that there is a complexity around, again, how we perceive these situations, and how we perceive them makes a difference in terms of what's going to influence our decision making around them. So to kind of get back to Jeanette's question as well, what are the most important decision making things that we can do? Well, being aware of how we're making a decision, again, not just for every simple day-to-day issue, but but being aware that we do have an unconscious processes, we have context that is influencing the way that we make our decisions, can at least start by that information and hopefully that sensitivity when we're sitting at the table with the committee deciding on what the new policy is going to be and discussing it, knowing that I have biases, knowing that I'm influenced by all the things that have happened to me and not happened to you. You know, the fact that I might have been in a specific accident at work 10 years ago that you didn't know anything about, and you've never been hurt in an accident, that's going to influence me in a way that is not influencing you. And I think we need some level of sensitivity to be aware that the intersection of bringing everybody to the table at the same time is going to bring different perspectives. And it's very possible that the more diverse perspectives that we have, the better off our decision making will be, because I might say something that you hadn't considered, and you might say something that I hadn't considered.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point. Jeanette, do you want to any thoughts? Oh, Mal as well.
No, very well, Jeanette.
Go ahead, Mal.
No, well, I was going to say actually, because I listened to a part of one of your podcasts, and you mentioned incentives. Now, incentives are part of better decision making actions. And you specifically say that non-monetary incentives are far, far better than those that are paid for in some form of reward. So what sort of incentives do you actually look at, Tim, that are non-monetary?
That's a great question, Mal. Let me first say that when it comes to human safety, when it comes to actual physical risk, there shouldn't be an incentive. It should be a mandate that we're going to stay safe. There shouldn't be, we'll reward you if you're a little safer than you are now. You should be 100% safe. And I actually did some work with a large oil refinery, oil company in Los Angeles a few years ago, where they were doing a turnaround where they shut down the plant, and you guys know this, right? In 24 hours they clean it and do all these kinds of things, and people die. You know, it's not as if I might cut my wrist or get a scratch on my arm, but people can die from this. And so the mandate was everyone lives, everyone's going to stay healthy, and there won't be any OSHA reportables as a result of it. So that was absolutely the mandate. But using behavioral science, we help get people in the context to remind them to use the checklists, to rely on the procedures that are already in place. And then the social context of everybody's already doing it, to have hourly reports coming up saying, guess what? This team just reported that they've completed this one task flawlessly. How is your team doing? And using this kind of social context as a way to make sure that our decision-making isn't going to always be perfect, but knowing that every other team is doing well actually influences my behavior. And so little things like that. So with that, I do want to get back to the idea of incentives, of monetary or cash-based or similar to cash, is a less effective engagement tool when it comes to engaging our emotions and intrinsic motivation than the non-monetary or experiential kinds of rewards. And you have to; these are very powerful tools, so you have to be very careful the way you use them. You have to be thoughtful.
Jeanette, I know Jeanette wants to chime in, so let Jeanette go, and then we've got free-flowing conversations here. So after Jeanette's finished, I'll bring them in. Okay, Jeanette, go ahead.
Now, I'm really enjoying the conversation. Tim, thank you so much. Just looking again back to the behavioral science, my pain and sadness sometimes that behavioral science has been utilized and used in so many areas like economics, politics, like Barack Obama's political campaign. They know that it's been done by the behavioralist. Healthcare, but I believe we still do not talk a lot about behavioral science in safety. Unfortunately, that's my personal feeling. Yes, we do have behavioral-based safety system, but always the major mistake is that we talk about observations and tools, and we don't talk about the behavioral science. For example, nudging our workers to take the right decisions. And it's not only when we do risk assessment or post-incident, but on daily basis, when we do operate our machines, our cranes, when we take those decisions on the daily basis. And talking about behavioral safety, I would love, Tim, that you work more and more with safety professionals in complexity, nudging to the right directions, taking those decisions. But my question, that was a summary
Oh, that's
discussion we
great.
had.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I really, really would love to see behavioral science more and more in health and safety, especially if it comes to mental health right now, like social distancing, like we're talking about gratitude, talking about depression, those type of things where we need to incorporate behavioral science. I'm really a big fan of behavioral science. My question, Tim, about biases.
Okay.
Because we talk about the context, but within those contexts we can also develop new biases, and people might influence our decisions with those biases. For example, social reference biases. So I don't know, he's richer, he's more successful, so she's a model, I need to reference to her, or she's more, I don't know, more successful, more beautiful. So social reference biases, impact biases, focus biases, how to get away from those biases, because we people tend to get back to status quo. To the comfort zone, and sometimes decisions require us to get out of the comfort zone. So Tim, any advice how to tackle biases?
Well, let's start with biases have evolved in our DNA for good reasons, right? There's the world is just so much more complex and more nuanced today than when our DNA was basically set 40 or 50,000 years ago. So when we heard, for instance, 40 or 50,000 years ago, if we happen to observe a food source and we're not really sure if that was going to be safe, but then we saw some other primates or other humans eating that food source, then we would go, oh, you know what? That's probably a good thing. That's probably going to be safe for me then as well. And so we had this social reinforcement built into our DNA from 40,000 years ago that says, if other people are doing it, it's probably going to be good for me. Now, today, the world is so much more complex because we're not just talking about where to sleep, where to eat, is it safe to be in this, to live in this village. Now we're talking about what's a good thing to do on Facebook. What is this a good product to buy? And so now we're using social reinforcement for all kinds of things. And so it's not that the bias of social reinforcement is bad. It's just that it can be misused. When we see a report that says 50,000 other people believe this is the product to buy, you go, well, that's a pretty big number. But if we saw 500 million people have already decided this, we're like, well, done deal. Pretty much, a huge amount of the population.
So
has
you're
already
saying change the reference point.
We've changed the reference point, and as a decision maker, I have to be willing to be aware that I'm going to be influenced by my social surroundings, and be willing to say, wait a minute, is this actually really better for me in my context, in the world that I live in? It is all this social pressure that I see, is this really actually going to help me, or is it not? And so it's not, there isn't so much just about overcoming biases in general, but overcoming biases in particular situations where we're going to make decisions, and what are the influences on us that are going to. So Jeanette, I'm sorry, I don't mean to not answer this fantastic question that you got.
No, it's
No,
like
I think it's a tough question to answer. Can I
Yeah.
just pull in some of the chats along the same lines, actually? So I just want to catch up. You know, Tim, you've stirred up some chats here. So we've got Tanya saying risk perception is hugely important. Thank you, Tanya. We can engage in micro experimentation. Tanya, if you're interested, 22nd of April is our networking event with Gary Wong on Kinevin, the basics to intermediate. Well, we are going to talk about fail to safe experiments and micro experimentation. That was a little plug, by the way. Midney says, as safety professionals, sometime we will be in a situation to take risk, and here where ALARP will play a big role. In our world, that's literally as low as reasonably practicable. But in fact, companies are tending more to go to ALARA, which is as low as reasonably acceptable. A big subject on its own, Tim. We could probably do a subject on that. Midney also says, I think even ALARP needs to have some restrictions, let's say, or boundary. Absolutely, because people go bonkers on ALARP, to be honest. Vince, decide to smoke, decide to take recreation. Okay, decide to have a drink. Yeah, okay. So these are all those things we talked about. Of, what you take and control. Tanya says, I'm going very fast through these, Tim. Please forgive me, and Mal and Janelle. So Tanya says, extrinsic versus intrinsic incentives, very important. Yeah, that's the value, isn't it?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Tanya brought up something earlier. She was talking about probability versus consequences.
Yes.
And I think that when it comes to decision making, and this is maybe one of the best decision-making hacks that you can think about, is really focus on process. And Jeanette, you brought up the idea that outcomes are important. The consequences are important. A particular, we can certainly say that something probably wasn't safe if someone was injured. However, just because someone wasn't injured doesn't necessarily mean it was safe. And so I'd like to challenge people to think about, what is the process that you're using for your decision making? Again, do you have the right people at the table? Do you have a diverse stakeholder group that is informing what are all the potential outcomes? Are you doing a pre-mortem and really thinking through things in such a way that will actually make the decision process better?
Yeah,
they're
good. Yeah, sorry, Tim. They're good points, and let's just caveat that by saying that in our world, we do tend to have these very rigorously and systematically in place, where you do all these risk assessments before after. It's a part of the thing called the management of change. But can I just cover some more of these others that are coming in? So as I said, you have sparked some interest here, so it would be not a good thing to not cover some of these. So Tanya says, make it easy to do the right thing. Ebru, great to see you on the show. I think your first time on the show. I think you're in Turkey, so I'll say tonight in Teşekkürler. And Ebru said, enable safe behavior. Tanya says, support people in their work. Absolutely. Where are we? We are. God, we've got a lot here. And Jeanette will know Katarzyna. I think Jeanette absolutely agree. Vince is talking about the nudge theory. BBS gets maybe 7% of the global workforce. What about 97%? Change the culture from I have to do to I want to do. Yes, well, that's personal, taking it personally, isn't it? That belonging
It's
cue again that we're talking about.
That's mindset.
Mindset, that's it, yeah. Darren says there's a specialist Irish course of behaviour science and safety.
Yeah,
I'll send you a link to that.
my point was a bit different. It's like there are some courses, but we're still lacking in implementing proper behavioural science in safety.
Yeah. Maybe we should cover that in a future course. Yeah, that's a good one. Gary says, buy to the mental shortcuts. We need to make fast, simple decisions in a complex world. I'm trying to make Gary sort of swing around from complexity to simple people, dimwits like me, see, and I'm slowly winning, but we'll see how that goes. Midney says, Darren Sutton, send it to me, you don't mind, please. Absolutely, go for it. Tanya, we need to look at normal, seemingly banal work to appreciate the complexity. Right, so we've caught up some of the chat there.
That was fast, Sonny.
Yeah, two other things. Tanya also talked about making it easy to do the right thing. We talk about friction in the behavioral science world. Reduce friction where you want people to do things right. Increase friction where you want people to slow down, right? For those instantaneous, quick decisions where it's just like, let's get someone to do the right thing, reduce friction. But where you want someone to slow down, then increase friction, because it's a good thing. You know, I know there's great work done on having entire factories can have a shutdown button, and when one person hits that shutdown button, everything can shut down, and nothing goes live again until that area has been cleared. And you know, I get the work challenges that go along with that, but there are some really good things, but increasing friction for everyone to think about it. I also just forgive me for being a bit semantic here about Gary mentioned that biases are sort of the shortcuts of decision making. Those are actually heuristics.
Yeah.
So I would actually say that a bias is actually is influencing our decision making on an unconscious level. It's a blind spot. A bias is like a blind spot that we're not aware of, and so it's very difficult to actually become aware of our own biases because they're blind spots. But we can look to cues around us. I get cues from my wife about what my biases are all the time. So
I get that all the time.
if I'm paying attention, I will know what my biases are from how she responds to me, and I'll go, I had a bias there. I was totally unconscious of that.
Well, you know, if you're free on the 22nd, stop by on that networking event. That's not a live event. That's actually where we have 100-seat maximum, where we're talking about this one with Kinevin. And I think you'll find that highly engaging because Gary is really into biases and the whole enchilada.
Awesome.
Ebru's come back saying leadership is highly important BBS for many reasons. Okay. Now look, we got about 8 minutes left before we crank off on the show. But can I sort of ask something? And folks, please keep coming, keep feeding us with the questions and thoughts. With the four of us in the experience that we've got, can I go around and say, if we're talking about better decision making with behavioral science, what would be one thing? If we sort of hinge it to risk and safety management, what is the one thing that we could share with the audience that would maybe help them with a better decision making with behavioral science? Let's start with you, Tim, and then we'll go reversing that way. Tim?
I think maybe the most important thing that comes to my mind is starting with an ethnographic review of what people are doing currently. Understand what the current conditions are and what those current conditions are producing in order to develop an appropriate intervention.
So that's like bringing in diversity and inclusion, I guess, isn't it?
It's more of an anthropological,
right,
review of this is what's happening. It's
Sure.
like putting the microscope on the workplace for the behaviors that are actually happening that are contributing to a specific situation.
Yeah, I can see Gary sat there going, good one. So you will definitely have won Gary over with that, and you're going to have to be on that networking. He loves the anthropological and all the other connections there. Thanks, Tim. Now, of course, this doesn't mean, please chime in. Feel free to freestyle on this. So, Mal, what's your thoughts?
Well, I certainly like the pre-mortem angle, which is always looking in front of you and not in the rear view mirror. Because again, if we use the old PDCA, plan, do, check, act, we can actually keep moving forward with that. And again, the old adage, what gets measured gets managed.
Yes.
It's for me, it's almost as simple as that.
Yeah, thanks, Mal. So I told you, didn't I? You'd make a friend with Gary there. Spot on, Tim. Let's all become ethnographers. You and Gary should go off for a beer or sometime in the future when all this COVID stuff's over. Jeanette, your thoughts?
Yeah, one beer and only till 10 o'clock at night.
Touche.
Let's do it together, Mal.
Exchange.
Jeanette, your thoughts?
First of all, I would like to thank you, Tim, for coming and answering our difficult questions, sometimes messy questions. I would like to say that we need more and more behavioral science and safety. That's my conclusion. So thanks to you, thanks to Darren Sutton, people who are doing a great job. And I'm not talking about only UK states. I'm talking about, again, inclusion and diversity, about Poland, Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, where unfortunately behavioral science is just a beginner of the journey. We're still sometimes struggling with physical safety, with the procedural safety. I would like to have more and more Darren Sutton's training across the world. If it comes to behavioral science, first of all, thank you, Tim. I'm taking context and creating an environment, work environment at the workplace, so our people take the right decisions. Thank you.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have anything to share. I'll just stitch it together. I mean, I've got lots of things I could say, but I won't. Okay. My thanks to you, Tim, for coming on the show and sharing such valuable time and your knowledge. Really appreciate that. In terms of what I've learned from this, doing these shows, is that I'm a hardcore engineer, and I've adjusted. You know, I'm enlightened. I've always talked about the safety continuum, going from design, engineering, procedures, and people. We spend a lot of time in the people area now, which we rightly should do, talking about behaviors and so on. I always say, well, look, I'm an expert on human being. I've been one for over 50 years, right? That's what I say. But in terms of comments, we've got Ebru saying the leader should be a good example set to all. Spot on, Tim. That's fine. Now, I'm going to cover these. See, Tanya, please come on that. Again, a little plug, come on the networking event. You'll love the words on there. I have to get my dictionary out every time Gary's starting to talk about stuff. Ebru says, fantastic, what gets measured is managed. Now, this is a good one, because Darren and I had a bit of a ping pong on Saturday, because I put out a post on key performance indicators, and he talks about Goodhart's law. And Goodhart's law is about measuring, and after a while it just goes in the background and becomes like wallpaper. And it's a very good point. You know, if we talk about what gets measured, gets managed, my only comment on that is make it meaningful, keep it real, keep it pragmatic, and don't let it become wallpaper on the wall. That's all I've got to say. Right? Other than that, you know, Tim, it's been a fascinating 57 minutes. It's actually flown past, and loved your company all the way. Do you want to have any closing thoughts, Tim, as our special guest? Any final thoughts?
No, Midney said something about changing culture, and I just want to reiterate the words of Peter Drucker, where he said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast."
Yeah.
Let's keep that in mind, that no matter where we're coming from, the context of the culture is extraordinarily powerful. And if whatever you think you're going to measure, it's going to be influenced by culture.
Yeah, and that is why I'm a big seller of culture. You know, diversity, inclusion, culture. We really have to start getting that narrowed down. Maybe not with algorithms, though. All right. Tanya says, I've been a human for a long time. The classic response to human factors not being appreciated as a helpful science. Well, I'm sorry, Tanya, but you know, I do feel that sometimes we do have to say that as a human being, I've gone through some things as well, just like everybody else. We all have views, we all have thoughts, and what we'd like to share. But other than that, Mal, Jeanette, Tim, thank you so much for all your time and efforts. And I'll catch up with you at the end of the show when I play the outro out, and speak to you in a short while. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you so much for stopping by and watching that live event. If you want to be notified of future live events, head over to our website. There's a form on there, hit the subscribe button, and I'll update you whenever live events come up. I promise you, no spam. And finally, we do have a YouTube channel. It's just simply Red Risks. Please subscribe and help us. Let's connect, share, and learn. Thanks. Catch you on the next live event.